Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. You're joined by myself, Matty Hewitt. We've got a special guest here this morning, but don't worry, we'll get onto that shortly. As you know, our new website is up. You can make the most of tactical analysis pieces, insight from former players and expert columnists, which is why a former colleague of mine, James Hunter, joins me here today. How are you, James?
Good morning. Yes, I'm great. Thank you, Matty. Good to see you again.
Yeah, all good. I mean, it seems just like yesterday.
It certainly does.
We've obviously linked up forces with yourself. Sunderland might not have made any January signings yet, but We Are Sunderland certainly has. You'll be joining us as a columnist. I mean, first of all, how much are you looking forward to that?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's a fresh, exciting challenge for me. It's a different discipline being a columnist rather than covering the club every single day. As I have done for 25 years. So it's something new, and it's something that I'm tremendously excited by. I'm really excited by the We Are Sunderland project altogether, and I'm really happy and pleased and proud to be on board with that.
Yeah, and then obviously just a little bit about yourself for some people who might not know. You've been, covering Sunderland, like you say, for the past 20 odd years. When did you first sort of start covering the club?
Yeah, so I came to the Northeast to start covering Sunderland in the summer of 1999. Sunderland had just been promoted to the Premier League. Before that, I covered Bradford City for a paper down in Yorkshire, and both Bradford and Sunderland were promoted together that season. I moved to cover Sunderland up here. Fabulous times, obviously, under Peter Reid in those days with that team, with Niall Quinn and Kevin Phillips, amongst others, of course. And and I've been here ever since. Here I am, almost 25 years later.
Yeah, there's plenty to talk about, obviously, from your time covering the club. I mean, just going back to those early sort of days, that the club that we see today is still a very different club to what you look back at when you first started covering it. What are some sort of memorable times that you had back in those sort of days, particularly with Peter Reid?
Yeah, I think when I look back then, obviously Sunderland finished back-to-back seventh place finishes in my first two seasons. And I think when I think back over the piece, I didn't really appreciate them enough at the time. I thought this was going to be the new reality, and this is sort of where Sunderland were going to be in the top half of the Premier League, challenging for European football. And I thought this was the new normal. And of course, sadly, as we know, it hasn't been the new normal. Those two seasons were the exception over the last quarter of a century anyway. So for me, I don't think I appreciated those enough. But they were great times. Great to see some fabulous players. Players of the quality of Stefan Schwartz and Julio Arca back in those days, and as I say, Kevin Phillips and Niall Quinn. It was just a wonderful team at a wonderful time, and Peter Reid was established here at that time when I first came to the club, and it was just wonderful time, wonderful football as well, and exciting. Obviously, there's been quite a few downs along the way since then, but in the early part, that was those were some of the best times. I think of some of those games. Think of the famous win against Chelsea at the Stadium of Light, and some of those games will always stick in the memory.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there. Obviously, the finishing just outside of European places is when you particularly look at the club now, where it is, it seems a long way off, but it does show, there's potential there at the same time, doesn't there?
Yeah, I mean, when you look back at the history of Sunderland, nobody doubts that Sunderland's a club with an incredibly rich and storied history, with title wins and FA Cup wins. But unfortunately, in recent times, it's been a bit. Well, it has been a trophy desert, hasn't it, for more than 50 years now? We know that. So it has changed massively. But this is a club, one of the most, one of the best supported clubs in the country, one of the best supported clubs outside the top flight in Europe. The potential is huge, and every manager that's come to Sunderland, 21 of them over my time I've dealt with, every one of them, I've said to each one, I've said, this is a club that's waiting for a manager or a head coach to be the spark, and if you can get Sunderland going, then the sky's the limit, really.
Yeah, we haven't quite got there yet to the same sort of lofty heights as Peter Reid. But looking back on some of the managers who you've spoken about there, is there any who stand out for you, just with the way they ran the club, the sort of professionalism side of things? Are there any sort of you had a good relationship with it at all as a working journalist?
Yeah, there was some great managers at Sunderland. Peter Reid, as I say, ruled the roost when I first came to the club, and he was wonderful to deal with. Great fun, lots of stories and anecdotes about Peter and his time. Some of them I could print, lots of them I couldn't. But then you think about even people like Roy Keane, of course. What a compelling, incredible character he was to deal with. Steve Bruce was a very a very good manager to deal with. I know that Sunderland fans have their issues with Steve Bruce for all kinds of reasons, but of course he's the last manager to take a Sunderland side and finish in the top 10 in the Premier League. And then, of course, as you look closer to modern day, Martin O'Neill was a wonderful character. You think about the years of Gus Poyet and Paolo Di Canio, which were very turbulent, of course, under Ellis Short's ownership. And then up to the more modern day when we've had Jack Ross, fabulous character, really nice chap. I think he was probably sacked by the club too early. To be honest, there are very few that I haven't got on with. Well, in fact, I can't think of any that I haven't got on with along the years. That there are people that you get on with well, and then there are people that you get on very well.
Yeah.
There have been plenty of managers, of course, that haven't worked at Sunderland, that have come to Sunderland and been, the results have been poor. And you'd look at people like Howard Wilkinson, and more recently David Moyes, of course, didn't work. Simon Grace and Chris Coleman, it didn't work. But as individuals, as people, as human beings, they were good people to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, which, like you say, that brings us on to present day. You've been covering Sunderland, on that upward trajectory, so to call it. You covered it alongside myself at the Chronicle. Just to go back to League One, just when we first sort of started working together, that there was a time when the Sunderland were there. What was it, the fourth year that we're down there? It very much felt like it was make or break prior to Kirill and co coming in, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Sunderland should never have been in a situation where they found themselves playing in the third tier. I know they'd done it once before in the club's history, just for a season, back in the late 80s. But Sunderland should never have found themselves in a position where they plummeted from the Premier League to League One in back-to-back seasons. And because of the way that football's structured now, of course, the finance in the Premier League and the finance in League One, poles apart. You can't even describe the differences between the two, and it really did. It imperiled the future of the football club. You can't you can't run a club that's got League One income when you've got players earning, or some players earning, Premier League wages. So it really did feel every year in League One as though it was make or break. And I think every manager that came in knew that they had to get the club out of the division, or they wouldn't last very long. I think that was proved when you look at the turnover of managers in League One. And thankfully, at the fourth time of asking, they did manage to get out of League One. It was never going to be. I said never going to be. It was never the hoped for stroll, romp to the League One title that Sunderland fans had possibly expected and certainly hoped for. It was coming up through the playoffs, and thankfully Alex Neil managed to pull Sunderland out of that division. Because I think that had they spent another year down there, you start to change from being a club that's in League One to a League One club, and that's a situation that Sunderland would never have accepted, and Sunderland fans would never have accepted. And I think that every year you spend down there, the closer you come to that. So they had to get out of there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, even then, just it wasn't like Sunderland fans are well accustomed to now. It certainly wasn't straightforward, that promotion either, was it? The sacking of Lee Johnson in the same year, who'd ended the Wembley drought, so to speak, with a Papa John's trophy win. It's interesting, that, isn't it? Because that itself in a game was just bizarre. Being in the Wembley Bowl with nobody there, it was like a ghost town. And that was the season I had covering the club in the middle of COVID. The financial aspect of that, as you say, if they'd been down there again, still would have been left feeling the fallout of that. It was just such a bizarre time to start covering the club from my perspective. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, how was that the first? It was just bizarre, wasn't it?
It was an amazing season for all kinds of reasons. Obviously, the previous season had been cut short. I think Sunderland had just gone to Bristol City and dropped points and dropped out of the top six as a result. So then we had all the uncertainty over what would happen next. But then, of course, when football did restart and we had the season that was impacted by COVID, it's like it's a season that I'll never forget. It was almost like football or sport on another planet. Really, I was setting out for games, driving along deserted motorways, going to empty service stations. When need to stay over, there were no restaurants open. It was a case of going out, picking up a takeaway, taking it back to your hotel room. It was, and that's just the off-field side of it, and that's without going to the, there was no match day traffic. No, you set off for a ground, 5 minutes before you needed to be there. It was just absolutely balmy. There were no fans, and it really lacked that. For having no fans there, it lost something vital. And anybody that thought, I mean, back in the 90s, I remember people saying, "Oh, one day nobody will go to matches. Everybody will watch it on TV. Everybody will watch every game on TV." Stadiums, they won't need stadiums. They'll have grounds which are covered by all cameras. But if you ever needed a reminder of what fans bring to football and why that scenario I've just mentioned should never happen, that season showed you. You were playing to these empty stands with 6 stewards, and it was just completely weird, and also to have a cup run, albeit the EFL trophy, which is a competition Sunderland should never find themselves competing in. Never mind anything else. But to have that run to Wembley and for the fans not to be able to share at least in a Wembley experience after so many days of disappointment at Wembley since 1973. It's a great shame that they weren't able to share that. Watching a trophy lift and fireworks go off in front of a deserted stadium was just, it was like, I don't know, it was like something from a sketch show.
Yeah,
I don't think. Hopefully, we'll never see anything quite like that again in terms of the strange atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that sticks in my mind from that season in particular, obviously the Wembley win, but when fans were allowed back in the stadium, I remember still to this day that Lincoln City playoff semi-final, obviously at the Stadium of Light, I think it was 10,000 allowed in. You had to socially distance, but that game sticks in my mind just from I'd gone nearly half a season without having any supporters in there. Everybody knows how well regarded supporters are up here in the Northeast, crazy for football. That day, even though there was only 10,000 supporters in, socially distanced around the stadium, the noise that day from having been there, like you say, hearing a pin drop, you could hear Max Power on the pitch barking orders, to then just that was incredible. I mean, that sort of set up a platform, didn't it, for the rise that Sunderland have been on since then, and the takeover of Kirill Dreyfus, the rebuilding of the club from the bottom. I mean, we'll get onto this season in a little bit, but what have you made of the club's rise since then? It's certainly been interesting, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, it was obviously starting from a very low base in League One, and there was a change of ownership, and Kirill Louis Dreyfus buying into the club, at first taking a stake in the club, and then gradually over time, buying a majority of the shares and taking control. And of course, that's coincided with an increase in an uplift in fortunes on the pitch, on that promotion that we've just mentioned. And it's been heartening to see that the club has managed to build from a strong financial base. I know that it can be frustrating because the club doesn't move as fast as you want it to do, but at the same time, it doesn't have the debts that were hanging over it previously, and which were wiped away when Ellis Short left the club. He removed the debt that was hanging over the club, which was I know Ellis Short had, there were many problems with Ellis Short's ownership, not least the dropping into League One, by the way. But if there's one thing that you can, or if there's one thing that you can thank him for, Sunderland fans can thank him for, it's for taking the debt away from the club when he left. And giving the new owners, back then Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven, a blank sheet of paper to work from. I mean, I know that they're not popular figures either, but now we move on to the Kirill Louis Dreyfus era, and the club's decided to go about it in a certain way, hasn't it? It's got this the model, which people have all kinds of opinions on, but it's got a model. It has a plan. At least, whereas in the past it seemed too much of a hodgepodge. Recruitment was dreadful over a long period. I looked at something the other day I did in what did I do in 2017, 2018, and I looked at I think Sunderland had sold 2 players in something like 7 or 8 years for a profit. I mean, just a nonsense, the money that was wasted in those days. They've now got a recruitment plan. We're still waiting to see exactly how it develops. But certainly the players that have come into the club, the vast majority of them, have been a success. We're seeing exciting talents like Jack Clark and Dan Ballard, and these kind of players that have come in under this new regime. Of course, Ross Stewart, who's already left, I know, but he was also very successful in his time here. We're seeing those players come in and the contributions that they've made, and it is an exciting time. The club won't get everything right. There have been players that come in. It's not an exact science, even when you're using data and analytics to do your recruitment. There are players that come in and haven't made it, and there are players that come in that won't make it. But you can't get every single signing right. The trick is to get the majority of it right, and as large a majority of the signings as possible. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but the club is heading in the right direction. It is on an upward curve. I mean, Tony Mowbray did a fabulous job last season in the club's first season in the Championship, back in the Championship, and to reach the playoffs, having come out of League One. I think in some ways he far exceeded expectations in that first season, and it set a high bar for the current season.
Yeah, which is obviously where we find ourselves now, isn't it? I mean, it's been Sunderland find themselves in an interesting situation again. I feel like I've said the word interesting, and yeah, but it's true. Sunderland are one of those clubs where they're never too far away from either a disaster or success, but it goes one or two ways. And I mean, we saw the success last season. I mean, they're still well within a touching place of the playoffs. What have you made of them just generally on the pitch so far this season?
Yeah, so this season, I mean, Sunderland are right in there, aren't they? I mean, there's only a goal difference keeping them out of the top 6 as we speak now. They only dropped out of the top 6 last weekend. So, they are right in there with, what are we, 19 games to go? Right in there. And that's with all the problems that the club has had this season. Obviously, a change of manager, Tony Mowbray getting the sack in controversial circumstances. The fact that strikers arrived over the summer and have hardly contributed. The four strikers that came in over the summer have scored 1 goal between them, and you just think to yourself, if those 4 strikers, and I know it's hard to lump everything on those 4 individuals, but if you think those 4 strikers, if each of those had scored 2 goals each, you've got an extra, so you then have an extra 7 goals to current situation. If you had an extra 7 goals, where might Sunderland have been then? Certainly in the top 6. You wouldn't be asking much if they'd have got 8 goals between them, those 4 strikers. How much better situation would be. Obviously, with 19 games to go, there's loads of opportunity for Sunderland to kick on from here. We still, Michael Beale has been in the job, about a month now, roughly. So we're still waiting to see exactly how his teams are going to play. He had a lot of games, but not much time. A lot of games over Christmas and New Year, but not much time to work with the players. Hard to put your stamp on the team that you inherit when you've had little time on the training ground. That is now passing. He's now getting time to work, so we should see on the pitch and this weekend and in coming weeks exactly what a Michael Beale team looks like, and then it will be an opportunity for people to judge that.
Yeah, I mean, just a final point. I mean, the January transfer window itself feels massive, as it does every season. It can define where you end up. We've spoken about on the podcast just in the past couple of weeks, if they were to lose Jack Clark, would that derail a season? Sunderland obviously can't afford that. They've spoken multiple times. Michael Beale himself said that they want to be in the playoff picture come the end of the year, which implies that Sunderland are going to strengthen in January. We've spoken again just on the pod past couple of weeks about them needing a striker, maybe a central midfield. Is there any area that you think that they're in desperate need of additions?
Well, you've got to say that they need more firepower. That has to be the number one priority for the club. I know that they've got 4 strikers already, and they'll say, well, you can't have 5, 6, 7, 8 strikers, and of course you can't. But if your 4 strikers aren't scoring goals, then you need firepower from somewhere. And when you're right on the cusp of the playoffs, as Sunderland are now, it could go either way. I mean, last season Sunderland won on the last day and got into the playoffs, finished 6th. They could equally have lost that last game, and other results could have gone against them, and they might have finished 7th or 8th. Sunderland might find themselves in a similar situation this season, and you don't want to fall short of the playoffs by 3 points or 4 points, 5 points, having not strengthened in January. The key area that everybody can see needs looking at, and people will say, if we just had a striker that scored 3 more goals, where might we have been? So you don't want to find yourself in that situation. So I feel that they have to capitalise on the platform that they've given themselves, and the only way they can do that is by strengthening and bringing in more firepower. I think you're right in terms of midfielder. I think a defensive midfielder is also on the agenda. So it's an area of the team that needs looking at, with Corey Evans having been out for so long. Corey Evans is going to be at least another month away from rejoining training, and then he hasn't played for, it will be more than a year. How up to speed is he going to be? He's going to be another year older. He was already a senior player in the team. He's going to be another year. How much of a meaningful contribution, can he make between now and the end of the season? It's going to be very tough for that. So they need somebody of his ilk, somebody that can come in and be Sunderland's Corey Evans, if you like, in this final 4 months of the season.
Yeah, so we'll look set for a pretty hectic couple of weeks, I would imagine. I mean, thanks again for joining me. We'll be hearing more from James over on our website. As he said there, he's going to be a weekly columnist. We Are Sunderland again is in partnership with the Sunderland Farm Museum. Don't forget to take advantage of our launch offer. You can subscribe for 6 months for just £1. And again, we'll catch you later on this week for another morning briefing. We'll have another deep dive tactical analysis piece going up later today, I believe. So yeah, thanks for joining us.